Lately, time feels strange, hours collapsing, conversations thinning, and a quiet electricity humming beneath ordinary days. You sense it, even if no one speaks of it. Reality itself seems to be reconfiguring. Most call it stress, chance, or coincidence. But a few recognize the pattern, a subtle tremor running through perception, as if existence were preparing to shed its old form. Something vast is happening, though invisible to nearly everyone. Only a small fraction can feel it moving through them, whispering one question that refuses to fade. What if the coming event isn't out there at all? But within you wake up one morning, and the air feels subtly different, almost denser, charged with a kind of quiet electricity. The same room, the same furniture, the same light leaking through the blinds, yet something is off. The world seems slightly out of tune, like a piano whose strings have shifted overnight. Nothing you can point to, but everything feels rearranged. That sensation, barely perceptible yet unmistakable, is the first sign that something underneath consensus reality is recalibrating. And while most dismiss it as fatigue or mood, a small fraction of people notice it for what it truly is, an invisible turning point. At first, the changes appear external. Traffic patterns feel less predictable, technology glitches in curious ways, conversations break rhythm. But the true disturbance isn't out there. It's in the way perception itself starts to uncoil. The familiar lens through which you've been interpreting the world, reliable, linear, logical, begins to blur at the edges. Suddenly, the old cause and effect logic no longer feels sufficient to explain what's happening. That's because it isn't. Reality, at its core, is not a fixed object. It's an interactive field responding to the frequency of observation. Every thought, every emotional tone, every fragment of attention acts like a tuning fork, sending vibrations through that field. And right now, the collective tuning of humanity is shifting, abruptly, silently, irreversibly. But not everyone is attuned enough to feel it. Those who are caught in constant reaction, noise, screens, outrage, comparison, are missing the faint hum beneath it all. They confuse motion with change, busyness with awareness. Meanwhile, the 1% who sense the undercurrent are doing something different. They are listening between the sounds. They are noticing the invisible architecture forming inside the apparent disorder. Imagine walking into a room where a faint frequency plays beyond the range of ordinary hearing. Most would hear silence, yet those who have trained their perception through stillness, through observation, through inner coherence, would detect the subtle resonance and orient toward it. That's how the invisible turning point feels. It's not loud, it's not obvious, but once you perceive it, you can't unsee it. This threshold isn't dramatic. There are no cosmic announcements, no visible signs in the sky. Instead, the transition expresses itself through the smallest deviations. Intuition firing milliseconds before logic, patterns repeating until you finally notice them, coincidences forming a quiet choreography of meaning. These are the breadcrumbs reality leaves for those awake enough to track them. And here lies the paradox. The more you chase these signs intellectually, the less you perceive them. The mind wants to analyze, to categorize, to prove. But this event unfolds only through direct perception, through the observer's capacity to remain fully present without collapsing the experience into explanation. The turning point becomes visible precisely when you stop trying to see it. It's not that the external world is mutating, it's that your participation in it is being rewritten. The field is responding to your inner frequency in real time. When you hold coherence, when your thoughts, emotions, and attention align, reality begins to organize around you in improbable ways. When you scatter your focus, the field mirrors that incoherence back through confusion, delay, or resistance. So the question becomes, which signal are you amplifying? The noise of uncertainty or the quiet rhythm of alignment? Pause for a moment. Feel the subtle pressure in your chest when you breathe. Notice how the air enters and leaves, carrying invisible information, electrical, magnetic, alive. That's not imagination, it's feedback. Your nervous system is an instrument tuned to the greater field, constantly exchanging data with the unseen layers of existence. As this invisible turning point unfolds, sensitivity becomes both a challenge and a gift. You may feel more affected by chaos, by others' emotions, by the acceleration of time itself. But those sensations aren't symptoms of collapse. They're indicators that your perception is expanding beyond the static layer of consensus reality. You're beginning to sense the field's deeper harmonics, the hidden order beneath what looks like disorder. In this moment, the world divides not by wealth, knowledge, or belief, but by awareness. Some see only the cracks in the old structures, the headlines of decay, the noise of endings. Others, the quiet observers, sense a new coherence emerging through the fractures. The same events, the same planet, two entirely different interpretations. One sees chaos, the other sees alignment. Which of these worlds are you perceiving? And perhaps more importantly, which one is responding to you right now? There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the familiar logic of your days no longer explains what you feel. You sense patterns emerging where none should exist, coincidences that seem choreographed, thoughts that echo back in physical form. And suddenly the question arises uninvited. Why do only a few people notice this? It's not intelligence. It's not belief. It's not spiritual practice, at least not in the conventional sense. The difference lies in a single capacity, the ability to sustain awareness long enough to see what hides between the frames of perception. Most people, without realizing it, are trapped in constant perceptual noise. Their attention flickers from task to task, screen to screen, thought to thought. The moment the invisible begins to reveal itself, it is drowned by the next notification, the next worry, the next reflexive reaction. Their awareness resets before it can register the subtle shifts taking place beneath the surface. But for the few who remain still, who can hold observation without rushing to label it, something extraordinary begins to occur. The edges of reality soften. What once seemed random starts to organize into sequences, connections, resonances. The universe begins to whisper back, mirroring the observer's state like a perfectly tuned echo chamber. This is not metaphysics. It's physics in motion, consciousness interacting with probability. Quantum experiments have shown that particles behave differently when observed. But what if observation itself is not a passive act? What if it is the organizing principle of existence? If that's true, then the question isn't what is happening to reality, but who is doing the observing, and with what quality of attention? That single shift in inquiry changes everything. When your attention is scattered, your reality mirrors fragmentation, unfinished plans, ambiguous signals, relationships looping through the same misunderstandings. When your attention is coherent, steady, unified, deliberate, life arranges itself around that clarity. You begin to experience a synchronization between inner state and outer event that feels almost orchestral. The external world stops being an independent stage and becomes a reflective surface, showing you the texture of your own consciousness. And here's where the divide forms, the quiet separation between the 1% who perceive the shift and the 99% who do not. It's not a hierarchy of worth. It's a difference in signal recognition. The distracted are tuned to noise, to reaction, to fear. The observant are tuned to coherence, to awareness, to resonance. The question, why do only a few notice, then evolves into a more radical one. What am I noticing right now that others might be missing? Take a simple moment, a conversation, a line at a store, the act of breathing. What if every ordinary event is a coded message from the field, waiting to be decoded through attention? What if every delay, every encounter, every coincidence is a mirror placed precisely where your awareness needs refinement? The field is never silent. We just rarely listen beyond our own internal noise. Imagine this for a second. Two people walk into the same cafe. One sees a busy morning, coffee steam, chatter, routine. The other notices the exact moment the light shifts across the floor, the way two strangers exchange a knowing glance, the subtle timing between music and movement. One experiences randomness, the other perceives alignment. Same environment, different frequency of awareness. The reality they inhabit is not the same, so the real question isn't about the event happening outside. It's whether your perception is calibrated to register it. Reality is constantly broadcasting signals of transformation, but only those tuned to coherence receive the transmission. The rest remain caught in static, believing the world is ordinary. This raises an uncomfortable truth. The limitation isn't in the external world, it's in perception itself. The filters you've inherited, the cultural, emotional, cognitive, decide what enters your awareness and what stays invisible. You may be surrounded by signs of awakening, yet unable to see them because your attention is trained to dismiss anything that doesn't fit the old model of cause and effect. If you truly sit with this realization, it changes the geometry of your thought. You stop asking, when will the shift happen, and start wondering, what in me keeps filtering it out? And that's where the transformation begins, not in seeking new information, but in refining the observer. Because the moment you adjust your internal frequency, you start perceiving a different version of reality, one that was always present, but hidden behind the blur of distraction. So ask again, slowly, honestly, why do only a small percentage of people notice these subtle shifts? Maybe it's because awareness, like a muscle, must be trained to detect what the eyes cannot see. Maybe the event dividing observers from the distracted is not a cosmic explosion, but a quiet calibration of perception happening right now, inside you. And as this realization settles, another truth begins to surface. One that changes the texture of your perception even further. The collapse you've been sensing isn't in the world at all. It's in the architecture of how you see it. At first, it feels like disorientation, a subtle displacement of how things fit together. The world looks the same, yet it doesn't behave the same. You notice time stretching and contracting in unpredictable ways, as if reality has lost its fixed rhythm. You try to blame exhaustion or stress, but deep down, there's a quieter knowing. Something fundamental in how you perceive is dissolving. The collapse doesn't happen with thunder, it happens in silence, one layer of assumption at a time. You start realizing that what you've always called reality is not a static landscape, but a reflection of how you interpret information. Every sight, every sound, every emotion has always been filtered through the invisible algorithms of attention and belief. When those filters begin to dissolve, the old world, the one built from interpretation rather than observation, begins to crumble. That is the silent collapse of perception. It's not that the external environment is falling apart, it's that your internal reference points are losing their authority. You no longer trust your automatic judgments, your habitual interpretations, your rehearsed reactions. They begin to feel foreign, like echoes from someone else's life. At first, this can feel frightening. The mind, wired to protect stability, scrambles to restore control, labeling, rationalizing, reattaching meaning to the fragments that no longer fit. But the more it tries, the more fragile its constructs become, because the collapse is not an error, it's an update. It's the moment perception stops serving the past and begins aligning with direct awareness. When the veil of interpretation thins, ordinary moments start to shimmer with a strange clarity. You begin to notice how perception itself bends around your focus. If you stare at chaos long enough, it expands. If you attend to stillness even for a second, the field reorganizes around it. The collapse, then, is not destruction. It's reconfiguration. It's reality recalibrating to match the quality of your attention. There's a point where cause and effect stop feeling linear. You think of someone and they message you. You decide to change a habit and the external conditions rearrange to support it. Logic struggles to keep up with these events, but they are not coincidences. They are echoes of coherence. When perception becomes less rigid, the universe becomes more responsive. The irony is that this responsiveness has always been there. You simply couldn't perceive it through the old lens of separation, the belief that you were a passive observer in a fixed world. That belief, once absolute, begins to disintegrate during the collapse. What replaces it is something profoundly subtle, a sense that observation itself participates in creation. In this stage, the temptation to search for external validation is strong. You might try to explain what you're feeling to others, only to meet blank stares. It's because most people are still operating within the stable illusion, the consensus grid. They need the world to remain predictable. Your experience, however, is moving in the opposite direction, into a space where predictability gives way to participation. To navigate this shift, the only tool that works is presence. Not the romanticized version of it, but the disciplined act of witnessing without interference. Every moment you resist labeling what's unfolding, perception resets to a higher resolution. The collapse becomes constructive. The noise subsides. The field begins to synchronize with your awareness instead of your fear. Try this now. Pause for one breath, and instead of naming what you feel, simply notice it. The texture, the weight, the temperature of the moment. Don't analyze, observe. You'll sense that perception isn't something happening inside your head. It's an ambient field extending through you and around you. When you relax into that field, everything you perceive begins to reorganize in real time. It's in this exact stillness that a revelation begins to form. The understanding that the world doesn't change when things change. It changes when you change the way you observe. Reality is plastic under the influence of consciousness. The outer world bends to the geometry of inner attention. The shift, therefore, isn't about controlling circumstances. It's about refining the lens through which they are seen. And as perception continues to uncoil, another truth emerges like a quiet echo from the next layer of awakening. Most people never reach this point, not because they can't, but because they make a crucial mistake. They try to transform reality before transforming the observer. The search always begins outward. A new method, a new teacher, a new revelation promising to open the gate that still feels locked. Humanity has developed an obsession with fixing the mirror instead of adjusting the face reflected in it. We chase phenomena, rituals, and proofs, hoping they'll confirm what intuition already whispers, that something greater is unfolding. But in that pursuit, a subtle error occurs, one so common it hides in plain sight. The mistake that blocks nearly everyone is deceptively simple, trying to transform reality before transforming the observer. It sounds harmless, even noble. Who wouldn't want to make the world better, calmer, clearer, more coherent? Yet every attempt to rearrange the outer world while the inner remains fragmented is like painting over fog. You may change the color, but the haze stays. The true obstruction is not what happens to you, but how you happen to what's happening. Look closer. Every emotion, every reaction, every perception acts as a frequency that shapes the field around you. When you feel scattered, reality mirrors it back through confusion, interruptions, detours. When you operate in clarity, circumstances align without visible effort. This isn't mystical thinking, it's feedback. Consciousness is the most responsive ecosystem in existence, and you're both participant and architect within it. But 99% of people are taught to begin in the wrong direction. From childhood, awareness is trained outward. Solve problems, change others, conquer uncertainty. The mind becomes addicted to control, and when control fails, as it always does, frustration grows, leading to the illusion that life itself is resisting us. In truth, it's only reflecting us. There's a moment in every awakening process when this becomes undeniable. You realize that no amount of manipulation, emotional, social, even spiritual, can substitute for coherence. The field doesn't respond to effort, it responds to resonance. You cannot fake alignment. You either are or you aren't. The universe listens not to your words or rituals, but to the frequency beneath them. Imagine trying to tune an instrument while the strings are vibrating chaotically. No matter how carefully you adjust the pegs, the sound will remain off until the vibration itself is stabilized. In the same way, reality can't harmonize with an observer whose attention oscillates between fear and control. To correct the outer symphony, you must first quiet the internal noise. This is where most seekers stop, at the threshold between outer action and inner refinement. They interpret silence as inactivity, stillness as passivity. But this stillness is not stagnation, it's recalibration. When you stop trying to manipulate the outcome, awareness begins to self-correct. The inner architecture starts aligning with a subtler intelligence that was always there, but buried beneath the turbulence of wanting. To see how deep this error runs, notice how even in moments of spiritual practice the mind tries to achieve. It wants results, signs, confirmation. It prays for external evidence that something invisible has shifted. But the field doesn't respond to demand, it responds to presence. Every grasping thought sends a small vibration of scarcity through the system, and the field mirrors it faithfully. The irony is that the proof everyone searches for is inside their own vibration. You can't perceive coherence from a state of incoherence, just as you can't hear a pure tone while producing noise. The act of chasing proof blocks the very sensitivity that would allow you to perceive it. So the question isn't, how do I make reality change? But how do I become clear enough for reality to reflect differently? The answer is far less dramatic than most expect. It's found in micro-adjustments of awareness, moments when you choose to pause before reacting, to observe the tension in your chest, to watch thought move without attaching to it. Each small act of conscious observation stabilizes the frequency of the observer. And when the observer stabilizes, the environment follows. This reversal of focus, from the outer to the inner, marks the beginning of true transformation. When you stop treating reality as an obstacle and start treating it as a mirror, resistance dissolves. You no longer waste energy fighting reflections. You start adjusting the light, and something astonishing begins to happen. Synchronicities multiply. Time feels elastic. Interactions become precise. Life organizes itself with a level of intelligence that no plan could reproduce. You begin to notice how little force is required when coherence replaces control. The 99% are still looking outward, searching for signs in the sky, for events to announce themselves. But the event has never been external. It begins quietly within the 1% who turn their attention inward, refining their perception until the field bends naturally around their coherence. And as this realization deepens, as you sense the shift from seeking to seeing, another truth starts to surface. Perhaps the event everyone is waiting for has already begun, and the only thing missing was the observer's ability to recognize it. There is no countdown, no signal in the sky, no global broadcast announcing its arrival. The event has no name because it doesn't belong to time. It doesn't begin with the collective. It begins with a shift so intimate that most people overlook it completely. While the world searches for external proof, the few who are awake realize that proof is already pulsing inside them. The event is not coming. It's happening. You can feel it in the spaces between actions, in the subtle acceleration of days, in the way coincidences form strange symmetries, in the way certain truths suddenly feel undeniable. The old world still continues, of course, screens flashing, people rushing, systems repeating. But beneath that visible hum, something deeper has ignited, a quiet reordering of perception. It doesn't announce itself through drama, it emerges through micro-perceptions, the tiny moments when your attention detaches from reaction and witnesses reality with a new clarity. You may notice it while driving and feeling time expand between 2 seconds, or in a conversation where your usual defenses fail to rise, and instead of reacting, you observe. That instant of stillness is not small. It's a new layer of consciousness folding into the human field. The paradox is that the event began the moment enough individuals stopped waiting for it. Every time one person reclaims their awareness from noise, they alter the informational grid surrounding all of us. It's subtle but cumulative, like invisible threads tightening into coherence. The change spreads not through words or beliefs, but through resonance, one coherent mind reorganizing the field around it, influencing others without direct intention. If you were to look at it scientifically, you could describe it as a shift in the collective electromagnetic signature of consciousness. But it's not technology that measures it, it's the human nervous system. Some people are already feeling it as physical sensations, heightened intuition, disrupted sleep, time distortions, surges of emotion, followed by inexplicable calm. Others call it instability, but what's really happening is recalibration. The inner circuitry of awareness is learning to process a higher bandwidth of information. For those who sense this unfolding, the temptation is to interpret it through fear, to think the world is ending, that systems are collapsing, that something external must be causing it. But the truth is gentler. What's collapsing is perception itself, the outdated architecture that once made you feel separate from the field. The event doesn't destroy, it synchronizes. It replaces reaction with coherence, fragmentation with awareness. The mind wants to categorize this, to map it to prophecies or timelines, but the event can't be captured by the intellect because it's not sequential. It unfolds differently for every observer, according to their capacity to remain present. For some, it begins as a subtle intuition that refuses to fade. For others, it comes as a sudden dismantling of what once felt solid: beliefs, careers, relationships, until all that remains is observation itself. In this new reality, manifestation no longer follows the old delay of cause and effect. It's almost instantaneous. You think, and the environment rearranges. You feel, and the frequency of events mirrors that emotion back in hours instead of weeks. The lag between energy and form is shrinking. That's why things seem to accelerate, not because time is speeding up, but because consciousness is reducing the gap between intention and experience. This is why waiting for the moment is futile. It's already in motion everywhere, distributed across billions of micro-events, most of them invisible. You could call it the flowering of awareness, consciousness recognizing itself through countless observers simultaneously. And you are one of them, contributing to the field simply by noticing. If you pay attention, you'll see evidence of it even in the mundane. The way people look into your eyes a little longer, the spontaneous synchronicities that align your path, the inner pull towards silence over noise. These aren't random, they're signatures of the event integrating into perception. Every act of genuine observation strengthens its presence in the collective. Think of it like a wave that's already passing through the planet, invisible yet measurable in subtle behavior shifts, in empathy rising where division once ruled, in creative impulses replacing fear. The majority are still unaware, interpreting the same wave as chaos or confusion. But those tuned to coherence recognize the pattern. The field is being rewritten by consciousness itself. And perhaps this realization, that the event is already here, pulsing through the fabric of ordinary life, leads to a deeper question. If the external transformation has already begun, then the next layer of awakening isn't about detecting it. It's about understanding how consciousness filters that transformation, why each person's reality responds differently, why two individuals standing in the same moment can experience two entirely distinct worlds. That is where the next threshold awaits, the filter of consciousness. Imagine standing before a vast window overlooking existence. The world beyond it is infinite, shimmering with possibilities, yet what you see depends entirely on the clarity of the glass. That glass is consciousness. Every thought, emotion, and belief leaves its trace upon it, like dust, fingerprints, or fog. Through it, you perceive reality not as it is, but as it passes through your internal filters. Most people assume they are seeing the world directly, but perception is never direct. It is mediated by the lens of the observer. Two individuals can look at the same event, a storm, a conflict, a coincidence, and inhabit entirely different worlds. One feels threatened, the other awakened. Same circumstance, different filter. This filter of consciousness is not static. It shifts moment to moment, depending on your inner state. When fear dominates, perception contracts. Everything appears dangerous, uncertain, or meaningless. When awareness expands, the same world feels alive with rhythm and intelligence. The event doesn't change. Your participation in it does. We rarely realize how thoroughly this filter shapes our experience. Every conversation, every interpretation, every emotional reaction passes through it before becoming what you call reality. The mind edits constantly, deleting what doesn't fit your expectations and amplifying what confirms them. This is why reality feels self-consistent, not because it is, but because you keep selecting the version that matches your inner assumptions. Here lies the quiet mechanism behind the divided world. Humanity is not living in one shared reality. It is living in billions of private projections overlapping in a fragile consensus. The coherence of that consensus is dissolving now because individual filters are being exposed. The event that has already begun is revealing how deeply perception manufactures the illusion of solidity. You can sense this revelation in small moments of dissonance, when your reactions no longer make sense to you, when what used to trigger anger now evokes curiosity, or when familiar spaces feel strangely foreign. Those are signs that the filter is thinning, that consciousness is recalibrating toward a more direct form of perception. The scientific mind might describe this as a change in neurological coherence. Brain regions once dominated by survival circuits beginning to synchronize with areas linked to creativity and intuition. The spiritual mind calls it awakening. Both are describing the same shift, the nervous system becoming transparent to the field it inhabits. But transparency comes with responsibility. Once you realize the filter defines the world you perceive, blame loses its function. You can no longer hold external circumstances accountable for your state. The filter is yours, and every distortion within it is a reflection of something unresolved inside. This recognition is not punishment, it's empowerment. Because if perception is created from within, transformation begins wherever attention is placed. Think of your consciousness as an instrument. Every thought is a note, every emotion a tone. Together they form the frequency through which reality responds. When the inner symphony is dissonant, judgment clashing with fear, desire fighting with doubt, the outer world mirrors that noise. When the inner sound harmonizes, thought aligned with feeling, attention anchored in presence, the world around you reorganizes to match that coherence. The filter of consciousness is not something to clear once and for all. It's a living interface, a dynamic membrane between the infinite and the personal. What matters is your relationship to it, whether you identify with the dust on the glass or the light shining through it. The more you identify with awareness itself, the thinner the filter becomes, allowing more of reality's true signal to pass through unaltered. To experience this directly, try a simple act of attention. The next time something disturbs you, a word, a delay, a sound, pause and trace the reaction backward. What meaning did your mind assign to it? What story did it revive? Notice how instantly the filter colors the experience. That moment of recognition is the beginning of freedom. Awareness observing its own distortions is self-correcting. It cleans the lens without effort. This subtle shift marks the emergence of the 1%. Not an elite group, but those who have learned to perceive before they react. They understand that the outer world is only ever showing them the state of the filter. And through that understanding, they begin to participate in creation consciously rather than unconsciously. As the filter becomes more transparent, perception grows multidimensional. You start to sense patterns unfolding beyond linear time, synchronicities connecting distant events, insights arriving before logic can assemble them. The distinction between inner and outer fades. You begin to experience life not as something happening to you, but through you. And from that vantage, another realization slowly emerges, waiting to be recognized, a pattern forming like light through clear glass. Certain signs begin to appear, unmistakable indicators that your consciousness is already aligning with the new frequency. Signs that reveal you may be among the few who can perceive the unfolding with clarity, the ones tuned to the resonance of the 1%. It never arrives with fanfare. There's no certificate, no mystical initiation, no voice announcing that you've crossed a threshold. It begins in subtler ways, in the quiet recognition that the world no longer behaves according to the same rules. You start noticing alignments that feel too precise to be coincidence, rhythms that connect inner feeling to outer event. Reality becomes responsive in ways that defy logic, yet feel completely natural. That's the first sign. The sense that life has stopped happening to you and has started unfolding with you. At first, you might dismiss it. You call it intuition, luck, or wishful thinking. But the repetitions grow impossible to ignore. You think of someone seconds before they reach out. You make a decision and watch circumstances rearrange almost instantly. The timing of things becomes poetic, exact. It's as though the universe has begun to speak in the language of synchronicity, and somehow you understand the syntax. This isn't fantasy, it's resonance. When your consciousness reaches a certain coherence, it begins to interact with the field differently. Instead of being carried by the momentum of collective noise, you start moving in rhythm with a subtler current. The world feels orchestrated, not by control, but by alignment. Those belonging to the 1% experience this not as superiority, but as sensitivity. They don't stand above the rest of humanity. They simply perceive more of what's already there. They feel fluctuations in the field before others do. They sense shifts in people's emotional frequencies before words are spoken. They catch glimpses of potential realities forming, not as visions, but as subtle knowing, like a memory of the future trying to surface. One of the clearest indicators is the changing perception of time. For most, time still moves linearly, hour after hour, cause then effect. But for those awakening, time begins to feel elastic. Moments stretch or compress depending on awareness. A single conversation can feel eternal, while days disappear in what feels like minutes. You start to notice that time is not something passing around you, it's something responding to you. Then there's intuition, not the vague kind, but the sharp, immediate kind that carries precision. It bypasses thought entirely, offering information so exact it almost feels external. You know which road to take, which call to make, which silence to keep. The mind tries to analyze it afterward, but the decision has already happened. The body has become an instrument of direct perception. This sensitivity can feel overwhelming at first. The noise of the collective becomes louder, and empathy heightens. You sense dissonance in conversations, feel undercurrents in public spaces, absorb subtle vibrations that once passed unnoticed. But with awareness, this sensitivity stabilizes. What once felt like chaos becomes data. You begin to distinguish what belongs to you and what is simply passing through. And beneath all of this, another sign emerges, the growing pull towards stillness. You find yourself craving silence over stimulation, observation over participation. The external world, once magnetic, begins to lose its grip. You no longer chase experiences, you allow them to unfold. This is not withdrawal, it's recalibration. Stillness becomes your point of power, the place where reality bends most easily. If you look closely, you'll see these traits among those quietly leading the shift. They aren't loud, they don't need to convince. Their presence feels grounded, their actions precise, their words measured. They exude a coherence that others can feel but can't explain. Spend a few minutes near such a person, and your own mind slows, your breathing steadies, your nervous system synchronizes. That's how the 1% create change, not through ideology, but through vibration. But here's what separates them most profoundly. They no longer confuse awareness with identity. They observe their emotions, but they don't become them. They experience thought without collapsing into its story. This detachment is not numbness, it's mastery. The observer within them remains still even as the outer world accelerates. If you've begun to sense this shift, if you feel time moving differently, intuition sharpening, synchronicities clustering, silence calling, then you're already within that frequency. You don't have to seek initiation. You are participating in it through the refinement of your perception. And yet, with this awakening comes a quiet challenge. The more conscious you become, the more resistance you feel from the parts of you still tied to the old field. There's a tension between coherence and chaos, between the emerging world and the one that's dissolving. To ignore this transition, to cling to what no longer resonates, is to risk dissonance at every level, physical, mental, and emotional. That is the danger now rising on the horizon, the danger of wasting this moment. There is a quiet danger hidden beneath the acceleration of this era. Not catastrophe, not punishment, but misalignment. The world is changing frequency faster than most can stabilize, and those who cling to the old rhythm begin to experience friction at every level. It starts subtly. Fatigue that doesn't make sense, emotions that swing unpredictably, restlessness that no amount of distraction can ease. These are not random symptoms. They are signs of resistance. the body and mind trying to hold a vibration that no longer matches the field around them. When the collective energy shifts, coherence becomes a necessity, not a luxury. The danger of wasting this moment lies in ignoring that call. To dismiss the change as imagination or coincidence is to remain anchored in a timeline that is already dissolving. Reality will continue to move forward, but perception that refuses to evolve will be left interpreting new frequencies through obsolete patterns. It's not punishment, it's physics. Every system, from a galaxy to a cell, seeks resonance with its environment. When the environment evolves, the system must adapt or disintegrate. Consciousness follows the same law. What many are experiencing now, anxiety without cause, emotional volatility, existential fatigue, are not malfunctions, but invitations. They signal that the inner architecture of perception must upgrade to handle the new coherence entering the planetary field. The mistake is to medicate the signal instead of decoding it. To drown the unease with distraction, consumption, or denial is to delay integration. The tension doesn't disappear. It compresses, waiting for the next opportunity to surface. And each time it does, the contrast between the old and the new grows sharper. That's why time feels faster now. The cycles of feedback between consciousness and reality have tightened. Lessons repeat more quickly because the field demands alignment. For those aware of this shift, the danger is subtler: complacency. Awareness alone isn't enough. Recognizing the new frequency intellectually without embodying it creates cognitive dissonance, a kind of spiritual stagnation disguised as understanding. You may know the vocabulary of awakening, yet still live by the reflexes of fear. You may speak of vibration while feeding attention into conflict. You may meditate but remain unchanged in the moments that matter. The universe doesn't respond to concepts, it responds to coherence. Every thought, emotion, and action either stabilizes or fragments your field. When coherence falters, the signal weakens, and the external world mirrors that fragmentation. Situations repeat. Relationships cycle through the same misunderstandings. Opportunities appear and vanish because the observer's frequency cannot hold them. This is what it means to waste the moment, to experience the opening of a new timeline while recycling the consciousness of the old. The body is one of the first instruments to reveal this mismatch. You might feel surges of energy that have no physical source, or exhaustion that sleep cannot touch. You may sense a pressure behind the sternum, a subtle pulse in the forehead, a shift in temperature without environmental cause. These are the body's ways of signaling energetic compression, the resistance between the speed of the new field and the density of unprocessed emotion. When you ignore these messages, the system compensates through imbalance, often labeled as stress, burnout, or illness. But underneath each symptom lies the same core message: realign or distort. To realign, you don't need grand rituals. You need presence, the willingness to stop reacting long enough for perception to reconfigure itself. When you breathe consciously into tension rather than escape it, you allow the nervous system to update its reference to the new field. When you observe emotion without narrative, you convert charge into clarity. When you act from coherence instead of fear, the external reality reorganizes accordingly. But the window for effortless transition is not indefinite. The planetary frequency is stabilizing into a higher baseline, and every observer must choose whether to synchronize or resist. Synchronization feels like flow, decisions arise naturally, synchronicities increase, time softens. Resistance feels like contraction, urgency, irritation, fragmentation. The difference is not moral, it's vibrational. The danger of wasting this moment, then, is not missing a cosmic event. It's remaining unconscious in the middle of one. To resist the upgrade is to preserve the illusion of control while losing the experience of harmony. The universe doesn't punish stagnation, but it does render it obsolete. The frequencies that no longer serve coherence begin to fade from relevance like radio stations going out of range. If you've noticed that certain paths, habits, or relationships are dissolving with unexpected speed, that's the field doing its work. It's not rejection, it's realignment. The greater intelligence of reality is pruning what cannot carry coherence forward. The more you resist, the heavier it feels. The more you surrender, the lighter you become. And somewhere in that surrender, an unexpected realization begins to dawn, that this transition is not about escaping the world, but rediscovering the power to shape it. That what separates the few who flow through this change from those who struggle is not luck, but awareness of a hidden capacity that has always existed, the ability to generate coherence from within. That awareness is the threshold of revelation, the discovery of the true power of the 1%. For a long time, the idea of the 1% has been linked with wealth, privilege, or control, those who seem to influence the direction of the world, while the rest simply adapt. But the real 1% have nothing to do with economic systems or social hierarchy. Their power operates in a completely different domain, consciousness. They don't dominate others, they resonate with reality in a way that redefines its structure. The true power of the 1% is coherence. Coherence is what happens when thought, emotion, and action stop pulling in different directions and begin vibrating as one. It's an alignment so complete that inner contradiction dissolves, and what remains is a unified field of intent. In that state, the universe doesn't need to be convinced, it simply mirrors that harmony back into form. Reality bends not through force, but through resonance. This is the quiet revolution taking place now. The 1% are not waiting for an external event. They are generating the frequency that is the event. They no longer attempt to control outcomes through effort. Instead, they stabilize their inner field, knowing that the outer will follow naturally. They understand that energy precedes matter, and that the quality of consciousness determines the configuration of events. Imagine reality as a vast ocean of frequencies. Most people thrash at the surface, reacting to every wave. The 1% have learned to tune to the deeper current, the stable undertow beneath the turbulence. From there, their movement seems effortless, yet their influence radiates far beyond what words or actions could accomplish. They create coherence in the field simply by existing in alignment. This power is not mystical, it's measurable. Heart-brain coherence studies show that a single regulated nervous system can entrain others nearby into calm and focus. The same principle scales invisibly across consciousness. A single coherent observer stabilizes countless others through resonance, without speech, without teaching, just presence. The field recognizes coherence and reorganizes itself around it. But to reach this state requires dismantling the illusions that dilute energy. The greatest of these illusions is separation, the belief that consciousness is contained within the body, that you end where everything else begins. The 1% have seen through that boundary. They recognize that perception is a continuous fabric, and that each act of awareness contributes to the whole. Every thought is a signal sent into the field. Every feeling is an instruction to reality about what to amplify. That's why their power is subtle but absolute. They no longer contradict themselves. Their thoughts are not fighting their emotions. Their intentions are not undone by doubt. They've learned the rare art of emotional congruence, the alignment of feeling with understanding. And once that alignment stabilizes, manifestation becomes natural, not forced. Reality begins to echo the internal rhythm of coherence in ever shorter intervals. The 1% understand something the rest have forgotten. The universe does not respond to words, only to vibration. You can repeat affirmations for years, but if your emotional frequency contradicts them, the field obeys the feeling, not the phrase. To shift the outer, you must first tune the inner, not through suppression, but through integration. Every emotion held in awareness becomes usable energy. Every thought seen clearly becomes signal instead of noise. Their discipline is observation. They don't chase outcomes, they monitor resonance. They treat every interaction as data, a mirror reflecting the current state of coherence. If life flows smoothly, alignment is confirmed. If resistance appears, it's feedback, not failure. They refine rather than react. This is what separates creation from control. One flows with intelligence, the other fights against it. And what makes this revelation truly radical is that it is not exclusive. The power of coherence isn't reserved for a chosen few. It's available to anyone willing to cultivate awareness with sincerity. The 1% simply remembered first. They are proof of what's possible when consciousness stops outsourcing its authority to circumstance. They embody a principle hidden in plain sight. The field obeys coherence. As this understanding spreads, it redefines what influence means. True power is no longer measured by followers, possessions, or visibility, but by stability, by how much chaos a single mind can absorb without losing its center. That stability becomes contagious. In a disordered world, coherence is rebellion. And here lies the deeper twist, the quiet realization emerging through this awakening. The 1% are not waiting for the event, and they're not reacting to it. They are the event itself. Their inner alignment generates the very shift everyone else is anticipating, and through them, consciousness remembers its own creative origin, because ultimately, the event is not something arriving from the sky or from history. It's something arising from within. The revelation that the power to transform reality has always belonged to the observer who remembers they are the source. And as this realization crystallizes, the next recognition begins to surface. The twist that changes everything. The event has never been separate from you, because you are the event. For so long, humanity has waited, for signs in the sky, for global alignments, for some external proof that the great transformation has finally arrived. Prophecies have been written, calendars calculated, celestial configurations tracked, all pointing towards something that would change everything. But what if the entire premise was inverted from the start? What if the long-awaited event is not approaching from the outside, but unfolding silently within the observer? The greatest secret, hidden in plain sight, is that the event everyone is anticipating cannot be seen until it is embodied. The shift doesn't descend upon the world, it awakens through you. That realization changes everything. It dismantles the search itself. You begin to see that every moment of awareness, every conscious breath, every act of still observation is not preparation for the event. It is the event. The field has been waiting, not for the right date, but for the right frequency, and that frequency emerges the instant an observer becomes coherent enough to sustain it. You are not a witness to the transformation, you are its instrument. For most people, that idea feels too intimate to accept. We have been conditioned to experience reality as spectators, reacting to circumstances rather than generating them. The human story has been one of dependency on external forces, governments, economies, divine interventions, anything that places the axis of power outside the self. But the deeper physics of consciousness reveals a different order. Creation radiates from the inside out. The universe is participatory, not hierarchical. The observer is not on the edge of the experiment. The observer is the experiment. Once you see that, the notion of waiting loses all meaning. The timelines that prophets and scientists alike have tried to map are not linear countdowns, but thresholds of awareness. The moment enough observers stabilize the new frequency, the collective reality rearranges to reflect it. The event becomes visible only after it is lived internally by a critical mass of individuals who have stopped outsourcing their consciousness. That's why so many feel the growing dissonance between their inner world and the collective one. It's not chaos, it's convergence. The old reality is built on reaction, on cause and effect experienced as separation. The new operates on resonance, where inner alignment immediately shapes outer manifestation. The lag between thought and form is shrinking because consciousness is reclaiming its authorship. When you start to experience this directly, life begins to look less like a sequence and more like a reflection. You realize that each interaction is a projection of your current state of coherence. The world mirrors you with astonishing precision, not to punish or reward, but to keep you aware of your creative position. Every conflict reveals where you're divided inside. Every moment of beauty shows where you've aligned. This is the real twist. There was never going to be a collective moment of ascension. The event has been fractal all along, repeating individually across billions of consciousnesses, each awakening becoming a node in the larger network of awareness. Every time one person remembers, the whole field gains information. The fabric of reality rewrites itself through micro-realizations, like pixels in a vast hologram updating simultaneously. And as that truth settles, something fundamental shifts in how you move through the world. You stop waiting for signs and start creating them. You realize that synchronicities are not messages from something beyond you. They are echoes from your own expanded self, confirming alignment. You stop praying for change and start embodying the frequency of it. Gratitude replaces expectation, and presence replaces anticipation. When you understand that the event is you, responsibility becomes liberation. The burden of waiting dissolves, and what remains is agency. You no longer fear uncertainty because you recognize it as raw material for creation. Every choice, every observation, every breath becomes an act of cosmic authorship. The universe is not testing you, it's responding to you in real time, adjusting its geometry according to the vibration you hold. This understanding doesn't isolate you, it connects you more deeply to everything. The separation between individual awakening and collective transformation collapses. There is no collective without the individual frequency that sustains it. Each coherent human being becomes a point of convergence, a generator of order in the midst of systemic noise. Through you, the universe reorganizes itself. So the real preparation was never about stockpiling knowledge, purifying the body, or decoding symbols. It was about remembering that you are not standing in front of the event, waiting for it to arrive. You are standing at its center, radiating it outward with every thought and feeling you allow into coherence. This realization doesn't announce itself with thunder. It unfolds in silence, in the moment you stop looking outside for confirmation. And in that stillness, a new kind of perception begins to arise. One that senses not only that the event is happening within you, but that it has been happening all along, waiting for you to notice. Because the event isn't coming. The event isn't approaching. The event has always been you, is remembering. Reality doesn't shift when time passes. It shifts when perception awakens. The event isn't waiting somewhere in the future. It's unfolding through every conscious observer who dares to see clearly. The 1% are not chosen. They are awake. They've remembered that creation begins within, that coherence is power, and that attention is the architect of reality. If something in these words resonated, if you felt a quiet recognition stirring inside, that is the signal. You've already stepped across the threshold. To show you've arrived here, write in the comments, "I am the observer of my own reality," and if this message spoke to you, stay connected to the field. Watch one of the videos appearing on your screen right now to keep expanding this awareness. The awakening continues wherever your attention flows next.